So I'm going to take this right from the top, but the battery on my earphones might run out, so we'll see how we get on. Yes, I'm going to do the whole why this, why now, why you, why me thing. So the name, I'm going to start with a joke. The script starts with a joke. I'm struggling to kind of say the script. That's kind of one of the challenges that I've got at the moment. The script starts with a joke. The Buddha says that we become the thing that we most resist, which in my case I think means I must have been pushing very hard against a fat Yorkshireman. That's what I am. I'm a fat Yorkshireman. So you might ask, why should I be telling you about creativity and doing things? And initially kind of my answer to this was that I've been in project management for 15 years, so I've been helping other people be creative and do things, and I've noticed some things and I want to tell you about those things. But also what I realised, like, from doing this, from talking about this repeatedly, is that actually I've been quite creative and I've done several things as well. And part of the purpose of this talk is to talk about when you've done things successfully. But also part of the purpose of this talk is to talk about abandoning quests. So starting to do things and then giving up on them. And I've done that as well. And this morning actually I had a realisation that one of the things that I've not abandoned it, but I've agreed activity the shit out of it, is learning Greek. That I'm not taking as many risks as I should be with learning Greek, and that's a problem. And it's also a problem that I'm not sure what I can do to kind of get out of the rut that I'm in with learning Greek. I have a conversation tutor. I talk to her twice a week. Sometimes I talk to my wife in Greek, but that's actually harder than you think. My wife's a native Greek speaker, but you know, we have relationship stuff to talk about, and so it's very different to be learning Greek at the same time. And also she gets very frustrated when I make grammatical errors. So yes, I've kind of realised that that's one of my challenges. So kind of, why should you listen to me? Because I've done something successfully. I just recently written a book which I think is going to be published. I'm arguing with the publishers at the moment about the contract. So that's a successful thing. And also I kind of did a thing that people might think is adventurous, and people might think is stupid, which is, how long ago is this now? So kind of 18 years ago now, I quit my job and decided to change my job to another thing that I didn't have any experience of doing. And it took me about 2.5 years to kind of actually get a job in this new thing. Fortunately, I had some savings, but I kind of completely spent all of my savings, and went, as I read somewhere, it said that people first go slowly broke and then quickly broke. I was definitely got to the quickly broke stage. So I've done some kind of adventurous things in that way. And I remember actually when I used to tell people that that's what I'd done, that I'd kind of given up my job and I was changing career into something else, there's this like look of like absolute fear on people's faces. And one of the things that they said is, well, if I did that, I'd never be able to get out of bed in the morning. And I never had any trouble with that at all, the getting out of bed in the morning thing. I mean, maybe that was because I was terrified. What I did do, actually, when I was self-unemployed, as I call myself, it's 2.5 years largely, which I really enjoyed. What I did do while I was self-unemployed is I stopped drinking, and I always got up before 9 o'clock. And they don't sound like big things, but it meant that like every day, pretty much, I was clear-headed. And I did a lot of writing in that time, recurring theme, and I did a lot of thinking and reading. And I think in some ways I'm going through a similar kind of phase at the moment. I'm doing thinking and reading. Well, enough about me. That's why me. Why you? Well, you might be wanting to do something creative or just something different. So kind of like, it's not necessarily creative, learning a language, it's just something different, but it's got all of the hallmarks that I'm going to talk about in terms of emotional work and kind of unexpected emotions that come with it, and then also kind of having to manage the thing that you've done and created. So you might be thinking about doing something, or you might have done some things and you might want to reflect on what it is you've done, creative things that you've done successfully. You might have abandoned some quests. Most people have. Most people have abandoned some quests. And so kind of that's why you. And I think actually that's pretty much everybody. I think everybody has had something that they've tried to do and they've been surprised when it's not gone as they expected. In my notes this morning, I was thinking about kind of like things that have gone humiliatingly wrong, and my friend was telling me about an example of playing squash against somebody and then realising that this was somebody who's really good at squash that was playing with the other hand. And I thought of an example this morning, and now as I'm talking about it I can't remember it at all. What the hell was it? No, it's gone. Oh yes, I do remember. It's connected to learning Greek. And so I've tried to do my B1 exam for Greek twice, and I failed it twice. And the first time I think it was just pretty much, kind of like fair enough. I wasn't really of an adequate standard. And the second time I failed to understand the question, which is, the kind of rookie error that people I used to know at school who said they weren't good at exams. It's the kind of thing they did. And it's something I start doing. I never did that when I did exams when I was younger. But that's not the humiliating thing. The humiliating thing is that if you do these exams in the Greek language, then you're probably going to go to some kind of Greek language school. So there is actually a full-time Greek language school where children go and learn in Greek in London. But there are also kind of weekend schools where the children of Greeks go and learn Greek at the weekend. And of course these are for children. So like when you go and sit in the room, they've got little chairs and they've got little tables. And when I was sitting there to do this exam, there were like a bunch of invigilators, and I noticed that there was a discussion going on because most of the other kids who were doing it, there are one or two enthusiasts my age, but most of the kids who are doing this are about 12, 13, and of course like some of the lads at that age have started to put on their growth spurt, and I don't have a growth spurt, I'm 5'5", so they've kind of overtaken me in height. And so there was this discussion going on about whether to give some of the taller kids some big boy chairs and big boy tables. And the humiliation is that they did give some of the taller kids big boy chairs and big boy tables, but they left me sitting on a little chair with a little table. So yes, I think like one of the points here is that when you see, that's not an humiliation of my Greek knowledge, although my Greek knowledge, I fucked up, I didn't read the question, so there was a humiliation of my Greek knowledge, but that's not the one that smarts. The one that smarts is that I didn't get a big boy table. And maybe if I was the kind of person who would complain, I would say, well, the fact that I didn't get a big boy table is the reason that I couldn't concentrate and read the exam questions, but that would be bollocks, so I'm not going to say that. Yes, so that's why me and why you, and a bit about humiliation. And then finally, why this and why now? So the this is basically I'm going to stitch a bunch of things together, but the reason this show is called The Biscuit Tin and the Biscuit is because of something that I realised when I was... I wrote a book called Delivering the Impossible, which is about project management. And one of the things I realised while I was writing that book is this is something that's like so obvious when you say it, but it's something that like escapes so many people. There's a difference between an idea and the reality, the implementation of that idea. And in fact, there are lots and lots of differences. And the rules for how you can look after an idea, how you can change an idea, the speed that kind of ideas come and go, and the rules for how you can look after a thing, how you can change a thing, the rules for how things come and go, they're completely different. And people tend to forget this in the enthusiasm for wanting to turn an idea into a reality. They tend to forget this. And one of the things that I started to realise about this is that when you do this, when you start to create something, and I'm using this fancy word, create, but it's also the same for doing things, like when you do something like learn Greek or pottery or whatever it is. What I realised was the reality of it, you have a load of unexpected obligations and emotions about the reality that you didn't expect from just the idea. You didn't expect these things. And so, for example, at the moment, I'm on the verge of signing a contract for a book, but I'm kind of arguing with the authorities about it, and it's relatively stressful and I don't like it. So that's why this, and that kind of reminded me of something called emotional work, which is emotional labour, which is a kind of idea that a lady by the name of Arlie Russell Hochschild developed, and I'm going to talk about that. So that's why this, and then also, like, setting up the problem, having persuaded you that I'm an authority on the problem, I'm going to try and persuade you to some degree that I'm also an authority on some kind of solutions. And again, kind of like coming back to why me. Well, I've been involved in actually making things happen, projects, and delivering them now for about 15 years. And some of these are big things and some of these small things. I've written my own book. I kind of sabotaged my own career by a radical change. I've got some authority about it. And then so why, I think I've already said why you. I think you've probably tried things. And some of those things have been successful. And I think if you have tried things and they've been successful, then there have been aspects of that emotionally you weren't prepared for. So that's the kind of basic outline of the show. And we're going to start off with this thing of the biscuit tin and the biscuit. And this is an idea. I mean, I've been writing again, like, kind of how does this relate to the script? I've been thinking about a real biscuit tin and biscuit example, which is the Great British Bake Off. And if you think about it, this is flour, sugar, and water, and some kind of fat, maybe some eggs, in every episode. But somehow they managed to get drama out of that. And they managed to get drama out of that because the best laid plans of mice and men often gang agley, to quote rather incomprehensibly somebody Burns, oh god, my brain, the poet Burns. So yes, best laid plans, they often go astray or go awry. Robbie Burns, that's his name. So yes, there's that. And And what they managed to do with, like, you know, all the techniques of reality TV is to get people to be crying over literally kind of like underdone biscuits or overdone biscuits, or biscuits that aren't crispy when they should be crispy, or biscuits that are soggy when they aren't soggy when they should be soggy, all that kind of stuff, right? And that's kind of like drama, and essentially that's the amount of drama you can get out of this if all you're doing is making biscuits. If the project that you're doing is kind of maybe more complex than that and involves more moving parts and more uncertainty, there's probably going to be a lot more drama. And I had a realization of this actually when I was reading a book. This is one of the most dangerous things about Kindle now. You can get Kindle to read aloud to you, which means you can get Kindle to read to you very, very boring books. And if you're doing something where it's not advisable to fall asleep, like walking, you can listen to these books. And so I was listening to a book about a chap called Kurt Gödel, G-O-umlaut-D-E-L, who basically completely upended mathematics by demonstrating that whatever mathematical system you have, there will be things in that mathematical system that are true that can't be proved by that mathematical system. And people have drawn all sorts of conclusions about this. I'm not sure I really understand it. But one of the things that I was reading in that book was, he said, the author said something that is very obvious, but again, is kind of something that sometimes people forget, that a description of a number and the number itself are different things. And that's where I got this idea of the biscuit tin and the biscuit. What it says on the label and the actual biscuit, those are different things. And what I started to realise, that, you know, what I've been saying about the Bake Off, is that we react emotionally to all of kind of changes, like whether things go right, whether things go wrong. So if you win the Bake Off and you become a TV star, then there are going to be other aspects of that are going to be difficult to manage. So maybe you'll be absolutely delighted initially that you won, but then you're going to have to deal with, you know, all that sweet advertising money that you're going to make, and, you know, lots of tensions are going to arise as a result of it. So and I'd been reading this book by this woman, Ali Russell Hochschild, where she was talking about emotional labour, and what she means by emotional labour is something slightly different, but it's kind of connected, which is, she means, you know, like if you're a waitress or a waiter, you have to be polite and nice to people. Well, you don't have to be, but you probably won't hold your job very long if you're not. And that is kind of work. That's work, dealing with the emotions that you have, and then coming up with some more appropriate emotions, some emotions that aren't going to get you fired, in reaction to the emotions that you have. And this is work. And what I realised was that kind of the reason, well, a lot of the difficulty that I kind of experience as a project manager is essentially the people who are trying to turn a description of something into a thing itself, trying to change a biscuit tin description into a biscuit. They just don't want to do that emotional work, so they don't want to deal with the emotions when they realise that their idea isn't as clever as they thought it was. And sometimes they don't even want to deal with the success either. They don't want to deal with the extra labour that's involved in something actually being a success. I used to work for a guy who had a phrase for this. He called it a success disaster. When you just don't have enough effort, you can't mount enough effort to kind of deal with the emotions and the actual work that needs doing when you succeed. So there is this thing, this emotional labour, and by emotional labour I don't mean kind of what happened when I was born and the nurses noticed that I was a ginger and essentially warned my mother that I was a ginger. My mum wasn't too worried because my dad's a ginger, and the nurses were very worried. And then when I came back 13 years later to have an appendectomy in the same hospital, they said, we don't like gingers, they bleed. It's like, well, other people bleed as well, surely, don't they? I don't think that's a kind of magical, it's not evidence of witchcraft. Anyway, so that's not the kind of emotional labour I'm talking about. I'm talking about the work that you have to do. And one of the things that's kind of led me on to is, well, it's two things really. One is another book and some other ideas. What I'm going to do here actually, there's two bits here that I'm skipping over, that when I do the show I'm not going to skip over. And one is to talk about emotions, what emotions there are. And there are 6 basic emotions, and I wonder if I can remember them. There's happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, surprise, happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, surprise, and anger. I have managed to remember them all. I'm very impressed with myself. And so I'm going to talk with the audience about those emotions. And then we're going to talk about Luke Baggins or Frodo Skywalker, and this thing called the hero's journey, which is basically this idea that there's just one story. And the way this story works is Luke Baggins or Frodo Skywalker, they're sitting at home in their village, the Tatooine Shire or whatever, and then this dude pops up and says, you've got to go on a quest. And of course it's quite nice in Tatooine, so they don't want to go on the quest. But then somebody gives them a prod or something happens that makes them realise they're going to have to go on this quest. And then, okay. And so they go off on this quest, and they take some friends with them, either some further amusing short people or a pedal bin. And then, sorry, this is a steep bit. Then kind of they have adventures, and at some points it looks like they're going to give up. And then lo and behold, surprise, surprise, they don't give up. And they have this kind of final ultimate showdown with some baddie. And they defeat the baddie. And then that's the end, and they're all very happy. And they go back to Tatooine Shire and they have an extra breakfast or whatever it is, right? So that's the kind of essential story. That kind of, we have this challenge, we take on this challenge, we learn stuff about ourselves, we learn that in some way we're the chosen ones, and then we go back to where we were before, and we're in a better state than we were before because we've done this thing. Now, that is the kind of universal story according to a bloke called Joseph Campbell, who wrote A Hero with 1,000 Faces. A lady more recently has written a book called A Heroine with 1,000 Faces and said that the story's a bit different for women. But this is a kind of, even the story for the heroine shares that arc. And what this shares is that we're destined to do this thing. We don't want to do it, but then we embark upon it, and then we embark upon it. We have all sorts of difficulties, and then we are victorious over these difficulties, and we come home. Now, the problem with this is that that's not the way that lots of stories work, is it? The way that lots of our real stories in our lives work is we kind of embark on the quest, and then we get distracted. Life gets in the way. As John Lennon famously said, life is just something that happens while you're making all of the plans. And, I think we all have got this experience of being sidetracked in our lives by having to earn a living. How annoying is that? Having to look after family, children or elderly parents or whatever it is, and then we don't. We kind of abandon our quest. We were promising at some stage, somebody told us we had talent, and then we kind of gave up. And this is quite depressing. And so this is, but you know, part of the reason for this is this emotional work that I've talked about. That we start doing something and there are all these kinds of difficulties, and also kind of very often we start doing something and then it doesn't fit with our environment, it doesn't fit with our timetable while we're picking up the kids, it doesn't fit with the fact that we're knackered after work and we don't have any money to be spending on it, and particularly we don't have any money or effort or energy to deal with the difficult bits, the bits that need thought, the bits that need pushing on through. We don't have the time and the energy to deal with those, and so that's kind of really difficult. And I've got a few ideas how we can get through that for something. So first thing is to realize that even though that's the story that we all tell, it's not the story we all experience. We experience abandoning quests all the time. The second thing is to realize, and I'm going to do an exercise here, which is me stepping up and down off of a chair. And the reason I'm going to do that is to show you that we all have a capacity. We all have a capacity for doing things. And if we try and do things at a rate which is beyond that capacity, it's just going to make us unhappy, and it's probably going to make us give up. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it, and I won't describe that exercise too much. And then what I'm going to do, this is the bit that is still creaking in the show, but we'll see if we can find a way through it, which is I'm going to talk about another lady whose book I've read, a woman called Patsy Rodenburg, and she wrote a book called Presence, which is about strategies for communicating. And one of the things that she writes about in that book is that there are three kinds of communication. She calls them circles, and they're called first circle, second circle, and third circle. I'm going to talk about them in a slightly weird order, and I'll explain why I talk about them in a weird order. And what I'm going to talk about first is third circle, and that's because third circle is the shouty one. Third circle is the aggressive one that gets in your face, and this is essentially a mode of communication where all you're doing is pushing out, all you're doing is pushing forward, and this is kind of exhausting for you, and it's probably exhausting for the people who listen as well. And you can only do it for so long before everybody stops listening, maybe even including yourself. So that's a kind of outward pushing communication. And then I'm going to take first circle next, which is the opposite of that, which is being quiet and basically either talking to yourself or not talking at all. And so this is the opposite of third circle. And again, this is not very effective for communication. And it's, it might be accepting of what's going on around you. Maybe you are listening to what's going on around you, but it's not effective for communication because you're not saying anything back. You're not responding to anything that you're here. And then, of course, you might have figured out that the preferred mode of communication is something that's halfway between these two, which is something where you do make yourself heard, you say the things you need to say, but then also you're quiet and you listen to what other people say. And this is called Second Circle. And when I first read about Second Circle, I think like naively, I sort of thought, well, that's how I'm going to communicate from now on. I'm going to always be in Second Circle. And then kind of very often, like, maybe a year would go by and then I'd notice that I wasn't doing that. I wasn't communicating in Second Circle in a lot of situations. I was either shouting at people, shouting at people on social media, shouting at loved ones, or I was just kind of saying yes, whatever, and not really engaging at all. And but during that time, I kind of developed a practice of writing every day. Well, something kind of changed. I developed a practice of writing every day, and I also developed a practice of sending what I'd written to somebody who volunteered to read it. And I was reading his stuff as well, and so we kind of got into this kind of ongoing business of writing and reading each other's work. And that kind of high quality time of not only concentrating on my work but also kind of editing it, which is the bit that I'd always struggled with. The thing that I realized about that was I can only do that for, I tell people an hour, but the honest truth is half an hour. I can only really do that for half an hour a day, and I can feel like a kind of switch that goes off in my head when I've had enough, when I've done enough and I can't really do any more. And maybe, like, I know there are tricks I could pull to do more than that. I could maybe go for a nap in the afternoon at some point and then wake up and push myself a bit further, or I can maybe do something last thing before I go to bed. But the reality of it is that kind of half an hour, and I do other things, I read things, etc., but that half an hour is like absolutely the kind of sweet spot. And I can do more than that. I can do more than that if I can do more than that if I'm just writing text, if I'm not editing. But then I connected that with this Patsy Rodenberg thing. And what I realized was that this is kind of like, this is not kind of shouting writing. It's not kind of like, hitting the keys really hard writing. And it's not a kind of writing that I did for a long time, which is just kind of writing whatever was in my head. And that was never meant for external consumption. This is kind of like engaging with the world. This is kind of writing something that is engaging with the world. And I can't do very much of that. Just like I can only do about 13 step-ups on the chair, I can't do very much of that editing. I can only do about half an hour a day. But the other thing I realized is that the way to move forward with the process of creating things, or the process of doing things, is to enter into them in Second Circle. And so that might mean, because like Second Circle is exhausting, that you have to do that in very small amounts to start off with. So very often, like I realized this morning that I'm kind of avoiding conflict with my Greek. I'm not pushing it as much as I should do. I'm kind of like, I'm not abandoning it, because I am carrying on to do it, but I'm not engaging with it as much as I should be. And so what I need to do is to engage with it a little bit more. But the intuition is to kind of say, well, yeah, I'm going to do an hour a day. In fact, that's what I did think this morning. I thought, well, I'm going to do an hour a day. And I think what I have to do is to do a little bit a day. Maybe kind of, 5 minutes of reading, 5 minutes of writing. That's all I need to do. Maybe those bits can get longer, but to start with, reading, writing, and also like the hardest thing of all, which is understanding people who are speaking, speaking on the radio, speaking in a cafe or something, understanding that kind of stuff. And now the thing is, I've never been diagnosed with one of these syndromes like ADHD or anything like that, but I know that I have a certain kind of pattern of concentration, and I know that, like, to some people that will sound crazy. That, what do you mean you only work on your writing half an hour a day? What do you mean that you could only really work on speaking 5 minutes a day? Those sound like ridiculous amounts of time. They do, but that is me actually kind of trying to make a commitment to engage with things in Second Circle. So the interesting thing about Second Circle, I'm going to quote another book now, is a favourite book of mine is Zen in the Art of Archery, which is about a German man learning how to do Japanese archery, which is, the archery is really just something to do while you're learning the Zen. And one of the things that's in that book is a slogan which is remain on good terms with whatever comes. And this is kind of very difficult to do, because very often our initial emotions to things, I see lots of things that say, like, you can control how you react to things. This seems to me like absolute bollocks, and it's not true, and you wouldn't want it to be true. Like, kind of, if there's a bus, like, I'm in traffic now, I don't want to be deciding how to react to things as traffic is coming towards me. I want my amygdala to be doing that and keeping me out of trouble. And I want, all of those emotions, fear, anger, surprise, happiness, sadness, disgust, I want those to kick in immediately. But then, one of the things from the that I learned from the kind of emotional labour book was that the people who are best at being waiters, the people who are best at doing jobs like, air hostesses, etc., they figure out a way of actually feeling the right emotions. They figure out a way of looking at things that means they can feel the right emotions. And so over time, what you're looking to do is you're looking to figure out a way of remaining on good terms with what comes, even if what comes is something embarrassing and difficult, or upsetting, or terrifying. And of course, this is easy to say, and it's very, very difficult to do. But that's kind of what you need to do. And then what I'm going to do for a last kind of exercise is I'm going to kind of do an exercise that is basically a way of kind of pushing through any kind of obstacle. But then I'm going to wonder, as a final thing, if that is the best way to deal with these things. Having said what I've just said, is just really storming through, is that the best way of dealing with these things? Or is there a more gentle way of doing it? If you storm through, are you going to end up with some kind of reaction that you're not ready for dealing with? I don't know. And then at the end, I'm going to have a heckle session, and I've already talked for 40 minutes. We'll see how this goes. I think what I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to walk through, I'm going to read through the script. So I've got two phones. I can read the script on one phone into another phone. I might not do it while I'm walking, but that's what I'm going to do tomorrow as like further way of thinking about these things.